We say that the Torah is our life. We know you cannot live without oxygen. So if I ask you, when does a person breathe? The answer is obvious. When you're alive, you're always breathing. From the moment you were born till the moment you leave this world. So that would include every possible change, both in your life and in time. So one never takes a vacation from breathing. You could take a vacation from work. You could even fast. You could even take a vacation from food and drink. You cannot take a vacation from breathing, which is another way of saying there is no free time. There's no time exempt from life. If you are alive, you're constantly breathing, constantly living. So I believe what the Rebbe is trying to tell us is when the Torah tells us that he wants us, when God tells us he wants us to study the Torah, we shouldn't consider that as there we live, and then what are we supposed to do with our life? Well, we're supposed to fill it with meaning and with significance. So therefore we do a lot of good deeds. We do commandments, the mitzvot, and one of the most important is to study. With this very healthy respect to Torah study, we also indirectly carve out a niche for ourselves. So there's a time when I don't study, because you really cannot study without taking a break. So if there's this idea of Torah study, then there must be a time of the day or a period in my life where I am not studying, where I'm exempt. But that is incorrect. The Torah is life. So it's not possible to imagine a scenario of 10 minutes without something being involved, either with the study of Torah, and now I'll add my own words, or the fulfillment of Torah. So even if you're going for a walk and enjoying the fresh air, that can be involved with Torah. First of all, if you're a man, you're wearing your yarmulke, if you're dressed modestly, even while you're walking, you're not supposed to look where you're not supposed to look. And most of all, just having a healthy body to serve God is also a Torah law. So there isn't a time of your life where you could be without spiritual life, which is Torah. The Rebbe goes even further, that before you were born by us, physical life begins. We won't get involved in the debate, conception or birth, but certainly before conception, it's silly to talk about life. There is no embryo, there is no fetus, there's no egg that's fertilized. There is not yet life. But if we talk about the neshama, which is the primary source of life for a Jew, this neshama existed before the physical body was formed. And this holy neshama in Shamayim, in heaven, is already involved with the study of Torah. And that's what it means. B'shivtecha b'veisecha. Even when you're sitting in your house, not only referring to your house in San Francisco, but telling the neshama on earth, when you were sitting in your house, meaning in heaven, you were involved with Torah. Then you went on a journey. The next two words in the Shema is uvelechtecha b'derech. You're traveling on a path. So in every of the spiritual worlds that you had to visit before coming to this physical world, you were surrounded and involved with Torah. I'm sure you've heard of this beautiful tradition. Upon conception, the baby or the fetus is growing. It is studying Torah with an angel. This is true, of course, whether the child will be male or female. So the neshama, which before conception of the body was studying Torah, then when it goes on its path in any of the spiritual worlds, including this physical world, and then after birth, 80, 120 years, it's V'letecha B'derech, it's studying Torah. And then it comes a time when the physical body is put to rest in the ground. That's called lying down. Even when you're lying down, says Pirkei Avot, that the words of Torah will protect you. So even though we haven't seen a corpse move its lips, and certainly as far as we know, a corpse has no feelings, but because the essence of a person's life is not the body, it's his neshama, even while he's in the grave, there's the neshama, which is alive and vibrant. It is studying Torah. And eventually when you wake up, not only referring to waking up on Thursday morning, but waking up at the end of days with the resurrection of the dead, then too, you will be involved in the study of Torah. So this is a Kabbalistic interpretation of a verse in the Torah. The Torah tells us we should be studying Torah when we wake up in the morning, if we're traveling on a business trip, when we go to bed. And the mystical interpretation is that the neshama was always and is always involved with the Torah study, even before birth and even after death. Well, there's plenty to think about, but let me just throw out one tiny idea, and that is, based on this holy teaching, we have a much deeper insight into what we mean Torah. This is obviously a very large subject. Torah is the wisdom of God, or to put it in a very different form, it's God. I hope what I'm saying is correct. I'm not sure if the language is correct. God is an abstract for us we believe, we know that God exists, but it's not something obviously that can be felt with the five senses, nor can it even be conceived in thought, which is limited, because God is limitless. He is infinite. However, when we study the Torah, with all of its with all of the meanings, starting from the simple interpretation, continuing through the Midrash and what it alludes to, and then the Kabbalistic and the Hasidic, etc., the Torah actually allows us to sense godliness. And it's in many ways, again, I'm not sure if the language is appropriate, in many ways, by looking at the Torah, you could get a glimpse of God. Almost in the sense of looking at a shadow, you get a sense of what the shadow is representing. I don't like using the word shadow, though it's valuable in terms of an image. But the reason why is because the Torah is real. It's not a shadow. But let me put it in an anecdote, and we will go to the Tanya. Oh, probably one of the most famous pictures of a personality is the Rebbe. You will find the picture of the Rebbe in many hundreds of thousands of houses. It might even be in the millions, because people have the picture at work, and it might sound a little bit odd to you, but many non-Jews who have heard of the Rebbe actually have a picture, either for good luck or because they actually believe that this is a living saint. Well, photography didn't always exist. in the early 1700s, we don't have a photograph of the first Rebbe of Chabad, but we do have a painting, an accurate painting, because the Alter Rebbe was arrested by the Tsar's army, under the Tsar's, more than once. And the most prominent, very prominent revolutionaries or very prominent prisoners, they wanted to keep a record of what they looked like. So there's one of the very high officials who was a artist actually visited the Alter Rebbe and kept that image and painted it. He didn't ask the Rebbe to do a sitting for him, but the picture that we have of the Alter Rebbe is basically from a non-Jewish artist who saw the Rebbe in prison. However, it was ratified by the Rebbes. They said, yes, this is an accurate depiction. We also have a picture of the third Rebbe of Chabad, pretty much for the same reason. He had to go to some rabbinical conferences, which were held under auspices of the government. And again, they painted him. And then after that, of course, we have photographs. So we don't have a picture or a photograph of the second Rebbe of Chabad. So once one of the great Rebbes was mentioned that his great-grandfather, there is no picture of him. And a chassid interjected, Rebbe, we do have a picture of him. When we study his holy writings, we can picture what kind of a tzaddik he was. And it was the Rebbe Rashab. He was very pleased by that insightful comment. Exactly what it means, I'm not sure. What it means to me is that when you study the work of a tzaddik, in your mind, you form some type of a picture of who would be saying something like this. In fact, it's interesting that there was a young man, this goes back, I think, in the 1960s, there was a young man who was a religious boy studying yeshiva, but in his yeshiva, the students were not permitted to grow a beard, only like the lecturers and the dean. There was one boy, he was very sincere and felt for religious reasons he should grow a beard. So this put him into opposition with the establishment, basically. They didn't want him to grow a beard. He was still a student, maybe an advanced student, but only a student. And their rule was you had to be married, you had to be a teacher in the school before you had a beard. So they pressured the mother, that the mother should tell her son, as a mother, that she doesn't like the beard. He was very respectful to his mother, but in this case, he said to his mother, it's a religious thing, Ma. We're both religious. We're both, I mean, you know, you're a beautiful, holy lady. You sent me to yeshiva, and I feel that wearing a beard is an expression of Yiddishkeit. So she said, you know what, there's the great Lubavitcher Rebbe. I will ask him if wearing a beard is really so important. So the exact letter and language I do not recall, not from the mother or from the Rebbe, but I remember the gist of the reply. The Rebbe wrote back, number one, that for your son, wearing a beard is a very strong affirmation of who he is and where he wants to go. If you force him to take off his beard, you're weakening one of his foundations of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism. And though all you want is that the beard should go off, but not the yarmulke and not the tzitzis and not the 8 hours of study of Talmud, but indirectly, if you weaken him by taking away one of his supports, this is the way he's celebrating his Judaism, or Judaism, and you're making him take it off, you might weaken everything. The second thing he said, without going into a halachic debate, when you think of Moshe, do you think of him with a beard or without a beard? Can you imagine Moses? I don't know how in Hollywood they would do it. I'm assuming even in Hollywood, they would make Moses with a beard. But can you imagine Moshe? Or how about Abraham? You think Abraham shaved? Obviously, it almost goes together. If you think of a holy tzaddik in the Bible or in the Talmud, or for that matter, any of the greats of Israel, you immediately picture an individual that has a beard. There have always been exceptions to a rule, but the rule was if you're a holy person, it's with a beard. Till today, if you think of a chassid, you think of a person with a beard. Now, is it possible to be observant, religious, committed to Hashem, be an exemplary Jew without a beard? Most probably, yes, assuming that they take their beard off without a razor. But without a shadow of a doubt, the beard is an authentic expression of Judaism. Okay, I just can't remember why I brought in the subject about this, but in any case, so we have the idea of Torah. Oh, right, I remember. So this idea of picturing God, God says you cannot picture me. I have no form. I have no dimension. And yet, if a person is completely involved in the study of Torah, lives his life according to the dictates of the Torah, I think it would be proper to say this person has an image of Hashem. Okay, so this is some of the thoughts from the Rebbe today, and we will finish the letter of Intanya. We're on page Kuf Yudalid, which is opposite page 226. The letter was addressed to the beloved friends and the beloved Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe. He's encouraging them to serve God on earth and with earth, because that is the uniqueness of the Jewish people. All nations have a group of people that serve their conception of God, but in all other groups, the way they serve their God is by, in a sense, carving out time and place and resources from the physical and dedicating it to the spiritual. The uniqueness of the Jewish people is that we don't have to carve out, we don't have to separate something from the physical to give to transform or to dedicate it to the spiritual. In the physical lies the spiritual. So in the eating, in the dressing, in the bathing, and most of all in the working, there is the service to Hashem. In fact, as I'm saying this, I recall a beautiful story, very concisely, that brings out this concept. One of the greatest tzaddikim who lived in the early 1800s was a tzaddik whose name was Reb David, and he came from Lulav. We call Reb David Lulav. Again, one of these giants of holiness. And today we have Starbucks all over the world, and especially in America. But going back to that time, if a person wanted a warm drink and just a little bit of a way station to regain his strength, and if he had a horse where the horse could be untethered and eat and drink and so on, there was these inns off the highway. I'm not sure if it's a Polish or Ukrainian or it was called a krechma. So this Reb David of Lulav, who was on a journey, had one of the places where he would stop off, where he was able to relax a little bit and rest before he went further to his on his journey. He knew the innkeeper, and who was a fellow Jew, and Reb David's love for a fellow Jew, a companion, was very hard to describe how powerful it was. One time, he was in the inn. He was actually preparing himself, studying, and the innkeeper was busy with a customer. And in comes, a farmer, and he comes to the equivalent of the front of the store, and he says, "Moshka, get me get me a pint of beer," or something like that. The fellow was busy, so he says something. "Peter, wait a little. You have to wait a couple of minutes." And Peter is anxious. He's like banging. "Hey, I want some service over here." Reb David, who was a tzaddik, saw that either this innkeeper will lose a customer, or alternatively, this innkeeper will have to deal with an irate customer, and both of them were not good scenarios. So he closed the book, and he said to this guy, "Peter, you want a pint? I'll get it for you. I know the innkeeper, he won't mind." So he goes behind and he takes out a pint of beer. He brings the pint of beer to this guy, Peter, and Peter looks at Reb David and he says, "I'm a really good customer. I come often for the 1 kopek that I give you. I think it's occasionally okay if you give me a little bit more than a pint. You don't have to be so exact." When Reb David heard that, he said, "I'm not really the owner. I was just trying to be helpful. I'm going to take the pint of beer back. When he's ready, he'll deal with you." Reb David traveled with a student, and the student was amazed at this whole story because Reb David was as far from business as I am right now from China. And Reb David stopped his study to do a favor to a fellow Jew. Well, what's the big fuss? What's the big spiel? All you have to do was go again and take a little bit extra. So he asked Reb David, and Reb David said, "Do you think I would just close the book for the sake of business? No. I remembered there's a law that says when you should have just measures, you should be honest in your weights. Now, I'm not a business person. When do I get a chance to do a mitzvah, to measure out a pint, to give out a yard of fabric, 3 pounds of meat? That's not me. I never do it. So I've always felt bad that I couldn't do this mitzvah. And then suddenly God gave me an opportunity. In fact, I could do 2 mitzvahs. One mitzvah is being honest in measure, in giving out measures. And in addition to which, I could do a favor for a fellow Jew. So I ran and I measured out exactly a pint. And I was thinking, now I'm doing a mitzvah. I'm being honest in business, measuring correctly. But when he said, give me a little bit more, after all, I'm a good customer, he changed it. It's not anymore about getting a good, a just measure, a honest measure. Now we're talking business. You want me as a customer? So give me a little bit more every once in a while. Well, I'm not a businessman. So I just put it back and I left the businessman do the business. It's a very instructive story. So if someone comes and buys, a pound of something, and you give that person a pound, you're actually serving Hashem with the physical. You don't have to go somewhere or do some meditation to make this into an offering to God. God says, be honest in your dealings. If you give him an honest measure, what will happen is you'll be doing a mitzvah. So the Alter Rebbe is writing his Hasidim, and he calls them my beloved friends. Serve God in your business, not through your business. How can you serve Hashem through your business? Obviously, as I just told you, being honest in business, but by giving tzedakah from your business. If you give tzedakah from your business, you are actually drawing godliness down to this world. So we're going to kuf yadalid 4 lines from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kidula maskila, as it's known to those that are wise, shabachines asiya belakus, when we talk about action in regard to godliness, he bechines hashpois v'amshochas achayes lamata lamata. That means to draw down the influence of the life force to below. Laman de lesle megame klum. Action in terms of heaven would mean to draw goodness to someone who has nothing. But now, it is obviously a struggle for almost all of us, to which the Rebbe writes, the more you slaughter your Yetzer, because sometimes you really have to fight with yourself to give to an unfortunate something that you worked quite hard for. The more you slaughter your Yetzer, and you open your hand, and your heart, which basically what you're doing is eskafia sitra achra. You're actually holding back the other side, because one of the ways of describing the other side is a description of something that exists and feels that its existence is warranted, it's necessary, rather than the existence acknowledging that it exists as a act of kindness from God. So if you're holding on to that salary, and then you give, you're actually eskafia sitra achra, you're holding back the other side. You're actually transforming darkness to light. Top line on page 228. Hashem Yizbarach, Hashechan Aleinu. You change the darkness to light. Hashem Yizbarach, Hashechan Aleinu, of Hashem, who's resting upon us. Bebechines Asiya, in the level of action. As we spoke yesterday at length, that we are on the time of the footsteps of Mashiach, and when you're able to serve Hashem in the flesh, on earth, and we're on the level of the footsteps of Mashiach, the lowest levels. So when we do this, Hashem draws down to the lowest levels as well. Yizka liris ayim, we will merit to see eye to eye, b'shuv Hashem siyam chuli, when Hashem will return us all to Zion. And with those beautiful words, we'll end for today's class, that when we're able to transform darkness to light, how do we do that? First, by holding back the negative that exists within us. This also takes away the negative that's found in creation, and we all merit to see the return of Zion. Amen. Okay, have a wonderful day, everyone. And those of you that are able to, please join me tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming Shabbos, which is Shabbos Nachmu. Let me give you a heads up. Starting from next Monday, that's July 26th, I'll be taking a break from my teaching, maybe to give you a chance also to to sample others, and then make sure you come back. So starting from next week, Monday, for 10 days approximately, there won't be any of the classes that I usually give. But we're on for tonight and tomorrow and Sunday. Okay, sei gesund, everyone. Shalom.
Thank you. Very good.
Bye-bye.
Okay.